Welcome to episode number 2 of the Haley Guitars Sub Tonic Bass Guitar build. Today, it's time to get started on building the actual parts as we turn this slab of elm and some boards of maple into actual pieces for the guitar. I'm Jeff, you're watching Home Built Workshop. Make sure you stick around. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Home Built Workshop. I hope you are doing awesome. Today, we're going to pick up sort of where we left off on the ST4 bass guitar. If you saw in an earlier video, I was doing some prototyping on the body, trying to get things worked out. If you haven't seen that video, I'm going to put a link to that in the description because there's some things that I talk about in that video, which I probably won't go as in-depth in this video. Since making that first video, which I guess we'll call part 1, I've done a lot of testing, a lot of trial and error, and I've got here a fairly complete mock-up of the bass. This is not the body that I made in that first video. This is about the 8th body that I've made and probably the 10th or 12th neck. But I'm happy overall, aside from some final sanding here and there, with the results. And I'm ready to transfer this to an actual piece of wood. I recently slabbed up some elm that had been a dead standing tree in my area, and it's dry and ready to use. Now I don't have any video footage of me cutting up this elm, but I'll try to put a picture in here of what some of these slabs look like. I think with some careful cutting, there's some nice straight grain sections in there that I can trim them out, probably just using a circular saw. Sorry about that, I dropped you. After rough cutting the pieces out with the circular saw, I ran it through the drum sander a few times to get it nice and flat, and then cut the piece in half on the table saw. These will get glued together book matched, just like so. Before I glue it up, I'll use the test body just to make sure that I got my dimensions correct. And it looks like everything will fit with no issues, so it's time to add some glue. I forgot to mention that I did give these pieces a light pass on my jointer, just to make sure the edges are nice and square and smooth. Other than that, it's just a simple glue up. It's really cool when you watch the glue joint kind of come together and you get that little squeeze out going. It's going to be good. All right, now we just need to give this a little bit of time to dry. With the body blank ready to go, I think now I can load this thing up on the CNC machine and we can basically run the same operations I used to make this mock-up. There is one slight thing that I'm going to do just a little bit different for the actual build. This mock-up has all been in a right-handed configuration, and I like to make the first model a lefty. That way I can have it myself, use it for testing, make changes to it. It's kind of awkward trying to play a right-handed instrument because I am left-handed. So I always try to do the first one as a lefty. That lets me really be able to feel it exactly as it is, and I can make any changes going from there. In order to create a lefty, at first I thought I was going to have to completely model this guitar all over again from scratch. But it turns out there's some operations you can do in Fusion 360 to mirror the toolpath, which actually worked out awesome. I was able to mirror the toolpath with a couple tiny changes, and now I've got a left-handed mock-up body. Everything came out really good. I actually like the way this looks even better than the original one. So now I just need to load this on the machine, run this same set of G-code programs, and hopefully end up with a body that looks just like this, only out of this elm. Now, like I already mentioned, I'm not going to cover a ton of the machining of this body because, well, I've already got a video that covers a lot of that and sort of my order of operations. And really, you can only watch the CNC machine buzz around so many times before it gets kind of boring. I even get tired of watching it. So I'm just going to load this up. Maybe we'll throw in a couple of clips, just part of the process, and we'll see what we end up with. Hopefully it looks just like this. Once I had the body blank secured on the machine, I set the 0 off of the top of the piece, and I could start running these G-code files. I am really happy with how smooth the finish is right off the machine. And there's our body, right off the CNC machine. Now, all that's left to do are to cut these 4 little tabs loose to separate the body from the outer waist piece. So there it is. Turned out really nice. I got just a little bit of burning around the edge in a few spots. I think I had the RPM set just a little bit too high. Once I adjusted the RPM, after I smelled the burning, I slowed everything down, the burning went away. We'll just be able to sand that off. A little extra sanding, not really a big deal. Overall, I'm really happy with the way that turned out. All of the arm contours and the bevels and everything turned out really good. Nice and smooth, not 100% smooth. There's still plenty of handwork that we're going to need to do on this. So don't worry, if you happen to be concerned with cutting out a guitar body on a CNC machine, you're not getting away from the sanding, the final fitment, all of the handwork. There's still plenty of that to come. Now, we need a neck. For the neck, I'm going to use this piece of hard maple. This is a 3/4 inch thick piece. By the time we get a 1/4 inch fretboard on there, it's going to give us a neck thickness of about 1 inch. Pretty standard measurements, nothing out of the ordinary. All I need to do is mark out a center line so that I have something to use to line it up when I place this piece on the CNC machine, because we're going to do this whole build using the CNC. After securing my neck blank to the wasteboard of the machine, I can begin running my cuts. The first of which is going to be cutting the truss rod slot as well as 2 slots for the carbon fiber reinforcement rods. You'll also probably notice that my neck blank is mounted at an angle. Due to the size of my machine, I can't quite fit this neck if I mount it straight up and down, so I had to work diagonally across the machine. This did provide a couple of challenges in setting up my G-code to run at an angle, but I eventually figured it out and it works just fine. With the truss rod slots complete, I flipped my neck blank over, still maintaining my alignment by using the dowel pins, and then I began carving the back of the neck. I'm using 2 separate operations as I carve the back of the neck. The first is a roughing operation, which really quickly removes the majority of the wood. Then I'll switch out my bit to a ball nose bit, and I'll run many passes using a very small step over. This leaves an extremely fine finish. I'm actually pretty impressed with how smooth it is right off the machine. While the neck is in the process of being cut out, I'm going to go back and do some work on this body, starting by using my router table to put a round over on all these edges. Plus a bonus, it's going to remove some of this burning, so I'll have less to sand later. I'm using a 5/16 round over. I tried a couple different sizes on some of the test bodies, and I think I like the look of this 5/16. You can see on the end a little bit of remnants of the tabs that held this in the waste material. By running this round over, it'll run right over those tabs, remove them. I don't even have to sand those off. Now I guess we can begin the hand sanding process. I'll round over these edges by hand. Since this bevels down out of the way, the router bit doesn't reach it. So a little bit of sanding here to round that over, blend it in. We'll be good to go. Well, it sounds like the robot has finished up the first portion of its job, carving the back of the neck. I'm going to go pull that off the machine so that we can work on getting the fretboard glued on, and then I'll resume sanding. And here's what we're left with at the moment. Really, it's just a plank of maple with a truss rod slot and a couple slots for the carbon fiber rods. And on the back side, the neck is mostly carved. It's not exactly to dimension just yet. I've left it just a little bit thick. That way I've got some room for sanding and some fine tuning if I need to. Now I want to work on installing the truss rod, the carbon fiber rods, and getting the fretboard glued into place. Now I know some people like to completely cut out the neck and then completely cut out the fretboard as two separate pieces before gluing them together, and for good reason, because if anything goes wrong, you're not losing the entire piece. What I'm going to do though, may or may not be controversial, is install the carbon fiber rods and the truss rod. I'm going to glue on the fretboard, and then I'm going to put this back on the machine to finish slotting the fretboard, radiusing the fretboard, and cutting out the outer shape of the neck. This is part of the reason why I had so many test necks before I was comfortable cutting an actual piece of maple. I wanted to make sure that I had the process down, all my toolpaths, everything were good, because I knew I wanted to attach the fretboard before cutting everything out. There is always a chance, even with all of my testing, that something could go awry. I may end up trashing this fretboard and the neck blank. I hope I don't, but it's always a possibility. You just never know what could happen. But I'm going to take my chances. I've done a ton of test pieces, and I feel pretty comfortable with this process. My carbon fiber rods are just a little bit long, so I'll use the actual slot in the neck to mark where I need to trim these to length. And since these rods are actually made of carbon fiber, it's not advised to use any sort of power tool to cut them down. You don't want that fine dust flying in the air. So I'm just going to use a hacksaw to cut these to length. Now we can check the fit. Fits nice and flush. Drop in our truss rod. And we're ready to glue on the fretboard. As I'm gluing on the fretboard, I'm not masking off the area of the truss rod. I've tried that before, and I don't really notice any sort of difference between masking it off and not masking it off. I just try to be mindful of where I'm applying the glue and how much glue that I have applied so that I don't get excessive squeeze out into the truss rod slot. Since the back of this neck is already rounded, I've made a custom clamping caul that I'm going to use to support the back of the neck. That way I have a good solid surface to clamp to. Fretboard glued. We'll just let it dry for a bit. With the neck back out of the clamps, I'm going to load this thing back on the CNC machine and then make the last final cuts. The first will be to drill the fretboard markers and cut the nut slots. Then we'll work on the fretboard radius, fret slots, and the final cutout. Now, without moving anything, I'll just glue in the fretboard markers while the neck is right here on the machine. And then as soon as this glue's dry, I'll be able to just run my fretboard radiusing pass, which will level these out and put the radius on the fretboard. Slotting the fretboard is probably the slowest operation in this whole process. It takes a really long time because I'm using a .023 inch end mill, which is super tiny, so your feeds and speeds have to be really slow. Otherwise, you risk breaking the tiny bit. It seems like if you look at it wrong, it'll break, so you have to be really careful. If you watched the video I did recently on rebuilding the neck on a cigar box guitar, you remember in that video I did blind fret slots. That really was kind of because I've been practicing blind fret slots on this project, and that's exactly what I'm doing for this build. Blind fret slots are cool because the tang of the fret does not go all the way through the sides of the fretboard. It gives it a very clean look, and the process is almost identical to working on a neck that has binding. Well, right off the machine, this neck looks pretty good. We've got a few fuzzies here and there that we'll end up sanding off. But on the fretboard, although it feels pretty smooth, there are some machining marks on there. I want to go ahead and clean those up. I think some 320 on a radius block will take them off in no time. I'm not trying to change the radius. The radius is already in there. I just want to lightly sand it to remove the marks from the machining. Well, that removed most of the machining marks. There's still a little bit of sanding left to do on the fretboard as well as really the entire thing. But let's test fit this neck and see how it fits in the body. That is a nice fit. Not too tight, not too loose. There's some room for finish in there. That's going to be awesome. Well, it's been a long time in the making, but the Haley Guitars Sub Tonic Bass Guitar is finally coming together, and I am excited. In the next episode, I hope to finish this thing up completely. Get the frets, get the finish applied, get it wired up and fully assembled, and hopefully we'll be able to hear it make some noise. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss when that episode comes out. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.